I'd like to call the May 4th, 2022 Charter Revision Commission to order. First with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, starting with Connie.
Connie Hatfield, present.
Matthew Radio, present.
Virginia Santiago.
Rod Sherbet.
June Gagny.
Linda Stardust.
Tom Sinkowitz. Trev Harmon.
Approval of the minutes of April 18th, 2022. Did everybody get the minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Looking for a motion to
Move to accept the minutes.
accept, or if you see any issues.
I second that.
Second, Lynn and Tom, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So we open right up to public participation. Mr. Cunningham.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to know if it's okay I can pass these out. This is, I didn't get a chance to listen to the entire meeting that you had last, but I did hear that you were concerned about certain items, and I wanted to get some background to them.
And that's from your list, right?
Yep.
Okay.
One more. So that was my initial list that I put together, and hopefully it'll give you some idea. I think you'll also see attached to it on pages 2 and 3, putting some data behind the question on the issues concerning a tax collector and town clerk, in what areas of the state of Connecticut have people who are either elected or appointed. So I can get to that afterwards, but on the first page, we have the section 2.5b, and someone asked a question about, well, what does inflation really mean comparatively? You take a look at that first sentence there in yellow. Inflation, that's not the word from wrong already. Inflation from 1984 is now saying that $1 is 1984 to current, which is $2.77. Doing some quick math of what we have the low end of our numbers on 2.5b at 10,000 up to 50,000. That's asking for a lot. You're asking for anywhere from $277,000 to $50 million, supposedly. But a compromise could be set at, and I would say that the 250 would be a lower end for a town meeting. Anything greater than that requires a referendum. And the idea behind that, and that's why I brought it up originally, was because of the cost. Every single time we have something we have to go to a town meeting for, the town meeting requires you to put out the legal notice and do all the other work as well. So there is a cost related to all of that. So that is why I was looking for an adjustment to the numbers to try and give you an idea about inflation numbers as well. So that was what it was. Did anybody have some questions on that or concerns? Or
That looks good to me. That's
just an idea.
what we were looking for.
Yeah, okay. It's just an
It's
idea. That's why I
definitely
wanted
what we
to talk
talked
about.
about, inflation.
Right.
1984, and realistically, it's just, the things are just so much more now. It hasn't been changed at all since then.
Yeah.
The math is wrong on this.
I know. I'm just giving ideas and ballpark numbers. If we were looking at some ideas, though, I just threw it out there. It's up to you to kind of walk it through the rest of it. But it's a starting point.
Yeah, we had, it was much lower when we had this question.
It was 100,000.
Ballot, it was what, 50 and 150?
I can't stress enough how much it's important to get that word to the public in any way possible.
All right.
We don't have the 1984 numbers anymore. We're now dealing with 2022. And what do? And how much does it say? Because we can actually do some calculations of how many different town meetings we have, and then how many different adjourned meetings, like a referendum, so we can issue that as well.
That sounds good.
The other one is section 2.5D, increase the amount of the town shares for grants, or actually, I would even consider deleting the entire section on the whole. So again, that 10,000 could be raised up to a number, but I'm just throwing a number out there for 100,000. I've been talking to Mary Ann, who writes some of our grants, and also to our grant writer. And I think probably, if we think about it like that, I'm not sure if you're included in that with the numbers for how, when you go out for grant monies. Do you have to do that as well?
Oh, I don't know if that would be something Rita would do.
What's the question?
So this, under this town charter in section 25D, it says right now, currently, if you have a town grant that you can go for, anything over $10,000 requires a town meeting to discuss it.
No, we don't have that limitation. That would make it almost impossible for us to go after all of the grants we go after.
Absolutely. I mean, your grants are probably much, much more than that, and therefore,
And almost every 3 days, I receive information about a grant. Myself and Rena, our grant writer, meet on it. We decide whether or not we're eligible and whether or not we go after it. And we are currently pursuing 4 different grants that we didn't know about a month ago.
yes.
One of those grants, the PEG-PISA grant, is going to bring us about $36,000 in technology that we had to act very quickly on.
So what's the average, what would you say your average is for going up for grants?
It depends.
It depends on who's offering the grant. And some of the grants don't give us an amount. Home Depot, for example, it was between $10,000 and $200,000 was what we could apply for. We got the Lowe's grant, did our middle school gym. I think that was in the neighborhood of $150,000.
And that's a great point. I can give you one that I'm looking at right now, which is the Community Challenge Grant. Now, I think you can take a look at the online and look at Connecticut Community Challenge. You'll see they just did their first round of awards, and they went up to $10 million, but it also drops down to, a certain number, which is feasible for us to go like $250,000 up to $10 million. So you have to look at what each grant has to you can apply for, and then decide what you want to go for. I can tell you right now, I'd love to be able to go after the Community Challenge Grant for the full amount of $10 million, because there's a project that we're looking to do that would fall underneath that.
Take care of a few things, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So, this was put in here for some reason, back in 1984. It's on page 4, actually, in this charter. The grants have changed so much, 250 doesn't even sound like enough. Do you remember this one, Connie? When it was put in the, did you find it?
Page 4.
Page 4.
And by the way, that's a matching grant. It was the
Right.
intent originally.
Matching.
So the town had to match up to a certain point.
That's one of my questions was going around.
Other than the dollar amount, I think the operative phrase here is the local financial share.
That's the matching part.
Right. So, I mean, to me, the proposition to eliminate it entirely, I could not see myself supporting in any way, shape, or form.
You're right.
And that's probably
Put in there.
why that's in there.
Well, if there was up to $10,000,
Right, you can't leave
you
it.
might want to consider it.
And
But
consider
if you modify it,
That's
I guess
understandable.
I could see a big difference between the types of grants or how financial share that the school district might have to put up versus the town side. Without pressing the question on the board of ed, I'm not aware of what the financial share to put up for grants might actually be in practice or by requirement on the town side, because whatever the stake is, I think people are still going to want to know. People are still going to want to give that consent to using the dollars.
and there's so many that come up and so many things we apply for all the time. And you may have to come up and say, okay, you have 2 weeks to write the grant and get it in.
Well, that's what I'm seeing a lot of town meetings and referendums and a lot of votes, town votes. There's a lot going on now. There's a lot going on,
I
so.
would also ask for one more clarification on that particular line. It says the town. I think there should be a real clear definition of what the town actually is. Is it or is it not the Board of Education? And I think it should be worded such. Because that way it's very clear. If it excludes the Board of Education, it excludes them. That's fine. It's just a matter of clarification would probably help.
Wouldn't there likely be a state statute that would supersede that, though, probably defining schools receiving and applying for grants?
Could be.
I think there is.
Just shoot from the hip there. I would assume the state probably has a
Yeah.
lot of that wrapped
See,
up.
Rena Cabra would have all of that.
So basically, a single line item excluding the Board of Ed would clean it up.
It would make, so there's no doubt in anybody's mind what it actually refers to.
Simple.
And then whatever your pleasure is to make a change to the dollars, that's fine.
So in other words, the Board of Education would make their own decisions, and not the town. The town would have nothing to do with it.
Let me ask a quick question, if you don't mind. How many matchings do you have? Probably very limited.
So, how many do we have right now?
Oh,
We have the security one, we have E-rate,
E-rate,
which is
that's
matching, those are 2. And then the question is, do we choose to go out for them? The state lets us know in advance if we have a matching grant, and then we generally budget for the matching grants in advance if we have them. There's less in education than there is in municipalities, though, I believe.
yes. Most of the matchings are on the town side. But it's good to know that there are some on the Board of Ed side, and they've already prepared for it. So I hope that helps to clarify that one. 7.2, clarify the exemption claim of language. Can we consider elimination of 7.2, or the town runs through the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Selectmen call a warrant, as need to be unvoted by the Board of Selectmen, line of whatever you need.
So page 7, charter.
And there's new numbers now, we have a new charter, so.
I have some page 13.
Oh, do I have the wrong page? Yes, 13, sorry. You got it, page 13.
Oh, 17.
So additional boards and commissions. That's if we have something that comes up, we want to have an advisory board of some sort, and you want to put that together, you have to go to a town meeting. I thought that's the work of the Board of Selectmen when we're talking about daily operational stuff and things you'd like to be able to promote within your town. So I would like to see that possibly change so it's actually something that goes right through the Board of Selectmen unless there's another thought that I didn't think of.
Unless you just strike it.
I mean, we bring it up at a public meeting, a public discussion.
Yes.
I mean, I think it is a good idea to have it in there to clarify that, and that's actually the Board of Selectmen, but I think I've had people have asked, like, do we have a commission for this, or do we have a board for that? Like, they're curious as far as how does one get created, or where do they come from? So I think it'd be nice if, yeah, we don't need to go to a town meeting to do that, you go to that Board of Selectmen meeting.
Same thing with the league.
So
So
I think
how would you word that?
it needs to be clarified that it's the Board of Selectmen when it comes to appointing or abolishing a
I
board.
guess it would be changing to Board of Selectmen.
It would
As
have
I
to
read this,
change.
it says, as I understand it,
Right.
if somebody wanted to petition and was able to gather the support, they would be empowered to do just what this section
Yes.
states.
Right.
So is the discussion more along the lines that we want to take that away?
Giving the authority to the Board of Selectmen to have that at their, and you do petitions that go to the Board of Selectmen now. Had some in the past where, let's say someone wanted to have a town meeting, go to referendum versus town meeting, they do petitions. So I see this as a petition item. If they want a petition to have something, it's not going to be, we're definitely going to put it onto the agenda item. I'd like to have the input from the public.
I'm imagining the situation that leads somebody to create a town petition to do this probably means that they haven't had much success with their Board of Selectmen, or they don't have the confidence in their elected boards, and this is a end around if such a scenario was to present itself. That's how I'm interpreting that section there. I don't think it's there as a, you too can also do this with your selectmen. This is a citizen's ability to circumvent if needed for reasons would be left to the imagination, I suppose.
Art, off the top of your head, Art, do you remember what ordinance this relates to? Because it says by ordinance.
Yeah, I wouldn't,
We didn't look it up.
I'm curious because I don't see it as intended to be like a parallel
Homework for next meeting.
type of situation. It seems like if this isn't working, then go to option 2.
Okay.
Is this somewhat like when you formed the open space, or the open space commission? And then people applied,
Yes.
but there was a informational meeting.
Yeah, I was very foggy on this idea.
Yeah. But you
then
did have an
But then, like,
information.
what about the facilities committee?
Oh, the advisory building.
Advisory building.
Same thing.
You did that too, yes, and then you disbanded.
Disbanded it.
Yeah.
Right.
a lot of these that are on the other page were done by ordinance. there was an actual ordinance for inland wetlands to be created for, okay?
You just appointed,
If you notice on F speaks of the temporary advisory committees. 7F, 7-1F.
Yeah, at the board of selectmen.
Right. That's right.
So this, is 7-2 more of a permanent appoint,
well, I have a permanent appointed board.
well, like you have here, the economic development became a permanent.
And it became defunct after a while too, but never disbanded properly.
But
Is that
I'm just
default
saying,
of the ordinance, or is that default of procedure?
That's why we're gonna find out via the ordinance. We'll go back and look it up. If you have to make a modification to the ordinance, we'd like to have your input on that too.
All right, now, number 7, what you're trying to do is get rid of, if I'm not mistaken, the town meeting and let the selectmen,
It's basically just, when you're putting together, chapter 7 is appointed boards and commissions.
yep,
So all we're trying to do is put it into the operation of the board of selectmen, like we have a couple of appointed boards already, versus you have to call for a town meeting and review the issue and have a vote to have it yes or no.
yeah.
Same thing when you disband, according to this. I think it should still be either one way or the other, it's an operational.
Yeah.
Just language.
Yeah.
Talking language, right?
Okay. Number 9 is straightforward, simple, we can fix that because it's a easy. 9.3. 9.5, I really would like to talk to 9.5, it's more depth. All right, so it says here that the Board of Finance sets the rate.
Are you, your 95 feet? The sealed bids?
Page 7.
Yeah.
You do know it's lights on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I see what you're doing sometimes.
Yeah, the sealed bids you talked about.
Yep. I don't have copies, this was just given to me, but I think if, I'll get you copies for the next meeting, that's okay. This is Public Act 1371, officially made in October of 2013. We're looking for state statutes, section 7, 1, 4, 8, V as in Victor. And I didn't get a chance to read through it, but very briefly skimming through. Contracts less than the value of a certain amount, which here it says $75,000. Does it say? Oh, sorry.
The Board of Ed is.
Yeah, right. 25,000. So
Ours, yours, the town's is like
7,500 sealed bid.
And Board of Finance has something, but I forgot the number.
Well, the Board of Finance is the one who sets the number.
Okay, they set
According
the
to
numbers
this.
for them. They
According-
do that?
Yeah, according to the charter.
And that's the whole problem, right?
Well, I mean, if they
I mean,
would
if
try
they don't
setting
do it.
different numbers for everybody. Yeah.
If I could support our first selectman, for some special ed students, we'll have hospitals ask us for a specialized piece of equipment. That's $11,000. We just had one this last week. It's made in California. They make all of them for everyone in the country. If we were to put out to bid for that, no one would bid it. And we certainly would not get, our bidding procedure is 3 sealed bids that are only as good for 3 months, just as the town's is. That 25,000 number allows us to address those needs. A reading program for a classroom might be $13,000.
It's a lot of bidding going on all the time, and you're not going to get bidders sometimes. And that really does hinder their ability to do some more work. So I think tomorrow morning we should have a meeting with our chair for the Board of Finance, not tomorrow, Friday.
I'm just here for support, sir.
Okay, well, that's one of the subjects we can talk about. And I think if we can get an understanding, that might work out for everybody's benefit. We'll get back to you on that.
As a note on that, I would like to field a question from Mr. Sinkowitz. Do you recall when the last time the Board of Finance actually set that number at a meeting, either at like any meeting with an agenda pointing towards annual?
No,
meetings
definitely
or
not
anything?
annually. I remember it came up in discussion. Gary a lot of times bring it up and we would come to the bidding process, and so we would discuss it, but no, as far as how it's worded here, making it seem like we did it like as a
Annual event.
thing, yeah, that.
I think one of my initial concerns about this was just that we had, we just basically dropped the ball as the Board of Finance on
Yeah.
just exercising a necessary part of running the town, which was setting that number.
Mhm.
And I'd imagine that, you could pull people into a meeting similar to what we do on Friday, or whatever day it was, that would be part of a healthy discussion to set an appropriate number. And that would be part of that process. And all that would take is just a approving Board of Finance chair.
Mhm.
Okay. I appreciate the healthy discussion because we probably have not done a few things for a long time. So it's probably good that we're actually talking about each of these. And I do appreciate that.
Okay.
The next one is.
Can I make a comment on that one?
Yeah.
As far as the BOE's procurement policy, I spoke with you last night, is it set by the Board of Finance anyway? Or should there be wording in here, just like the grants, that it excludes the Board of Ed on this one?
Quite possibly. This statute I'm going to read through to verify, it does cover the entire municipality or not. And then go from there. On section 10.2G, so if you got an answer on this, I'd like to know. I'm going to have the attorney report to them too much lately, but I'll ask the question direct. What is their opinion about what is a contingency item within the budget? Because the annual budget doesn't, we already have a fallback number. We know we have to have a certain percentage of 10% of the, what is contingency though that they're building in? I think it was just the way it was worded. I'm going to ask Connie if she remembers, but.
Remember what?
Okay. On page number
18.
18.
Should I have it? Yeah, okay.
So that is 10.2G.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, the Board of Finance?
Yep.
All right.
Shall revise the estimates as deems desirable, prepare the recommended town budget, which may include a contingency fund not to exceed 2%. I don't think I've ever heard that phrase uttered at the Board of Finance for the annual budget.
No, usually we would just ask about the line item of the contingency fund. If we had questions on it, we would ask for selectmen,
Okay.
as far as.
So that's for the town side, not Board of Ed.
Right.
I think that since we have you have a policy for 10%, can't go below 10% for your general fund.
Yeah.
Is that the contingency fund, and that would what we would be talking about? So we don't have to have that listed in here, or redirect the wording on it to say our, whatever the number is. You never know, you might, what if you later on say, you know what, we don't have to set that number. We can just leave it be, because we're so healthy, we can just let it go. I mean, you just got to be thinking about what other things could be worded here instead, or just get rid of it. I don't know. But it's no definition. There's really no idea what it is.
You have no idea what a contingency fund is?
Oh, no, I do, but here, it makes it sound as if we have to have another line just for that contingency.
We have a line in our budget that on the town side that is specifically contingency.
Yeah.
Right.
That's in there.
I built that in, and it's built in by the Board of Selectmen because you're looking for what if something happens during the year on the town side of the budget.
Yeah.
That's, from what I can tell, at least over the last 4 or 5 years, that's never been anywhere close to 2% of the overall.
Exactly.
Overall budget.
But I can understand too.
I'm
Sorry. I was going to say, I can understand too, though, if the first selectman is pointing out how somebody reading this could interpret that as they don't necessarily know the difference between the unrestricted and the fund balance and a contingency line item. But,
Right.
so maybe there should be clarification.
I'm sure that in the Board of Education, because of, teaching, you do have some kind of a little amount of money you put aside for this in case something happens. Called a contingency fund.
Not really.
Oh, well, maybe not you, but I want to tell you something.
No, I'm not gonna argue. No. I'm talking about, let's say I put in my budget, which I was usually the budget for the math department. That's my job. There was always something in there, a little extra, so that if something happened, I needed this, or my teachers needed that, I could get it. But I'll go back to many, many years ago, when I brought in a subject, calculus. I sat here, and you people told me, no, we will not buy the books. I bought the calculus books, Brandon and I. And I said, that's not going to happen anymore. I'm not going to let a teacher hang because these people would not do it.
Well, first of all, thank you for that comment.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that to be thanked.
But your department is a very small fraction compared to what if a building has a structural issue.
Yes, agreed. You know.
I'm just wondering, what brought that to your attention? Out of everything in this book, why did you focus on that?
Because what I did was I read every single paragraph and tried to interpret it. And if I found something that didn't quite jive,
Oh, okay.
that's what I was looking at.
So you read everything in the book and, okay. Many times.
So we do have a general fund policy or a fund balance policy,
Yeah.
which dictates the amount that we need it funded at or where it's supposed to be in proportion to the operating fund. Right.
So either rewording this to say that, the fund balance policy was reviewed, might be a way to say it.
Well, I guess, so trying to view it through the lens of charter revision, trying to separate what's a legitimate, I'm not using the word legitimate, what's a semantics change, which might not need to be on the ballot as a referendum item versus a question which needs a thumb up or thumb down at the poll station. Is this more in the semantics category then?
Yeah.
Which, with all due respect, I don't think would belong in our domain for that discussion. Right, because we're here to make recommendations on changes to put on the ballot.
Right. But the other job of a charter revision is to see through the eyes of the public who are reading it and saying, what is it? And see if you can clarify it as best you can. So there is no, ambiguity going through.
How would that work from the lens of our recommendations that we would make as a
Well, you're thinking through what your changes would be, and then you have the attorney also review as well.
Would that manifest as a question on the ballot?
I know.
That's my concern, because that's amongst our constraints is we know we can only put on so many questions.
Don't forget, when it comes to a certain point, we take all of this, bring it to the attorney, and they, by the way, just so you know, the attorney also offered to do what you're doing right now. Sure, the cost is much more. But they can't
I don't like that.
Thank you for your service. But they have to do it anyway, and they may have that same question, so.
Okay.
What I'm hearing here is just basically the definition, what is a contingency? Is that it?
Yeah, I think the idea is that the towns, you can see that there's a line there for that, but on the other side, the Board of Education doesn't have that in their listing. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, just what is the definition? What is your contingency? A good, healthy discussion. Last one that I had for tonight, last one I had is 10-4, and 10-4 is on page 18 as well.
Yeah.
All right, so all I'm looking for here is if you agree that all requests by special appropriation shall be made in writing by the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education and forwarded to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance shall act on all requests for special appropriations and conform provisions to 5. The board, which board?
Finance.
There we go. So if we change that to finance, I think that would be appropriate. But I just wanted to bring it up.
Only because the other boards are mentioned.
Yeah.
Would that
We
go
know for a
into
fact
the
that it
language?
doesn't specifically know.
Actually, that's the following chain of how the process works.
Yeah.
It usually is the Board of Finance that puts it up. So,
And to circle back, if the lawyer, attorney comes back saying this is a semantics, this is a word change,
Yeah.
that's something that they would tell them to be
correct.
possibly not a question.
Say like 4% of this is just.
That's the ones that I had. And if you had any questions about appointed or elected on the next few pages, we happen to have a town clerk here, and she's the one helping put this together. Any questions for her? Oh, the yellow. So you flip over the page that I had for you. Flip back.
Oh, this. A map that has.
Yep. All color coded.
This is libertarian.
The tax collector actually put that together.
Well, just for fun, I copied off of the ledger chart, and that's what I handed you. And just so you can see what's in somebody else's charter.
Yeah.
Some of the topics that we've talked about before, there's a town council. They actually have 9 members on their town.
Who's this one?
This is Ledger.
Ledger. Oh,
And I put the mayor, they have a mayor.
Yeah, that's like.
It's a little
Putnam.
different,
Putnam's
yeah.
like that too, Putnam has a mayor.
And the population is only about, it's about the same as
Yeah.
Plainfield, because the 2020 census actually was lower. I don't think it was 15,000.
Putnam's the same way. Putnam has a board of selectmen, board of finance, town meeting type government, and,
Tom,
they're
can I
elected.
get a copy? Listen, that copy in front
Oh,
of
yeah,
you.
here's that.
Oh,
Town council
yeah.
serves as a
Yeah, we're missing that extra copy.
serves without
Yeah, no, it is interesting.
Yeah, take that.
Oh, you looked it up too?
Yeah, there were several towns that I
Yeah.
looked at.
sounds
And,
like it.
there's one, I think it's the only way they only get it, they stick it out of the.
We'll sit back.
I think I saw that, yeah, from everybody, okay, also.
Person I suggest, I got it. Someone's just-
Actually, I have the tax collector on here too. I thought I had the town clerk on ledger, but I have the tax collector.
They're elected.
Yeah, I didn't get that one for you, but I do have the tax collector on here and how it's written up. You can find a lot of charters online. They're not all online, but if you're interested in looking any of these towns up that have appointed tax collectors and town clerks, you can sometimes find their charters. This is a really good list.
I believe it's Putnam, I'm looking at, their tax collector works.
Yeah, I can go back to the 80s and 90s, where our town clerk was the same town clerk every year. She was elected,
Yes.
and she was elected because the other, I don't remember if she was, I think she was a Democrat. The Republicans
Yeah.
never put anybody on.
Right.
Right.
It was, so she got it automatically all those years.
That's right, and that happens too.
Yeah,
If they're good and they're why mess with it?
yeah.
Putnam also, their tax
But see, you
collector works.
wonder if jobs like tax collector and town clerk, they're not jobs that you just come in here and sit and listen and make a comment. They're jobs that you've got to learn, and it's nothing you're going to learn overnight. It's going to take you a while. It's just like teaching. You're not going to be a teacher the first day you're there. You know, you've got to work at it. And it just seems odd to me that these people are going to run. If you're doing a good job, keep them. You're not going to get rid of them. You know, so instead of running, appoint them. You know,
We talked about that.
My authority.
I think we're all in agreement pretty much.
Yes.
These are ultimately compliance positions. There's
Yes.
policies
Who are they
that.
gonna work for? How are they gonna work? How's this gonna work in the government? Who's gonna work in our government? Like Putnam right now, it works under the treasurer, under the Department of Finance. Okay, is that where the tax collector would be working out of? Is that how we can't just say, okay, we're just gonna appoint you. Oh, we're gonna appoint you.
Section 8.5,
Reporting
No.
mechanism.
maybe they're appointed. He's their boss.
8.4.
You know, you've got your selectmen, and your selectmen are the ones that should be there watching, making sure that everything is done.
Yeah, okay.
Kevin, am I right or wrong?
And we have overview also with the finance director.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying. Is that
So
where it
the-
would go, to the finance?
Section 8.4 is the template that allows for the finance officer to be hired,
Yeah.
appointed in this
Yeah,
case.
yeah.
Right.
So,
But I'm saying, is that where the tax collector would work with the finance?
Oh, I'm sure, yes,
You know,
yes.
It's easy to say, let's just hire them, but how?
Well, I still believe that the selectmen are going to hire, whether, you know, because that's the part of their jobs. If it's not, why be there?
it would be reporting directly to the first selectman.
Yeah.
Where if there's a vacancy due to resignation or termination.
And
scope of responsibility?
Posting the opening for the position, doing the receiving of all the applicants,
Yep,
reviewing those applications to see who the top groups are, so bringing them in for interviews.
yep,
And then, I personally, I would never do it alone.
no,
I mean, I appreciate the fact that Tom was there to help out because they have two people. If my opinion is different than his, we talk it out and figure out why. But really, you're looking for the top applicants to come in and then be able to choose from there.
But
So we-
what happens if you're out next time? Does that affect that position that was brought in?
Because the person who was hired or appointed continues that position.
Continues?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, well, we talked about the last meeting, and I remember we talked about is there a hiring process? Basically, it's what Kevin just described,
Right.
you know,
Yes,
those steps that he
yes.
did. But we kind of were saying that that's not really noted anywhere or known
Right,
of
that's-
what.
that
And
should be.
and part of that is because that has varied between administration to administration. You know, Kevin described how he went about it. I know that Captain Kendridge had a different idea as far as.
Hiring.
Right, and so that was kind of fuzzy there as far as, so what is exactly for an appointed position, what would be the hiring process to fill that vacancy?
Would it add 8.5? Now you'd have 8.5 and 8.6 would be town clerk and tax collector underneath those. Same
That's
appointment.
how I would envision it
Yeah.
happening.
Okay, under the same.
Similar chain of command
Right.
and record board.
yeah.
And I think the issue of the hiring process itself is much larger than charter revision perhaps. And that's something that should be part of the, I don't know if this would fall vernacular or family, but whether that's a proper policy piece, some form of ordinance or something like that, that should exist on the town side. That would, I think, remove any administration incumbent to a.
I would think it would be a guidance, however. I mean, every administration can come and do something just a little different. So a good guidance point would be
The town has to abide by fair hiring practices anyway, and there's
COE.
federal guidelines that steer that process to a large extent. I'd imagine anything the town came up with would be pretty boilerplate in terms of how it looked and just to prove compliance.
But wouldn't you have to mention who would do the hiring?
Just like the other chapter did.
Okay.
Yep. Section 8.4 puts that with
All right.
with the Board of
Board of
Selectors.
Selectmen, okay.
My final 2 cents on it were ultimately these two positions, although they are elected, the big difference to me is that elected positions tend to be a politician, you know where the word comes from. These are policymakers that are put into those positions. These two positions are compliance. They're not there to
That's the thought I
change.
had too, that it doesn't really matter what party you're on.
Right.
Because this is a job.
Right.
Yes,
You don't-
exactly
Should
right.
not-
Yep.
The last thing you would
Nobody's
want.
asked who works here, what part.
You wouldn't want an activist, right? Because ultimately, you can boil it down, in my opinion. A politician is an activist. That's why they get elected. That's why it's a numbers game through democracy. You don't want an activist as a tax collector. You don't want an activist as your town clerk, because there's a lot of important guidelines and procedures that need to be followed in order to protect the integrity of the whole system.
And as well, to add to that, there's also a lot of certifications.
Yes.
So as they get in, if they're taking up certain certifications, they are required to get them in a certain period of time.
We have to maintain them too throughout the lifetime of sitting on that seat. So it's not something that you can just, get and then you're done. You have to continue earning the credits through the entire lifetime of your career. But I did just go through the appointing process as the town clerk, so exactly what you're discussing. And that is the process that we went through. I submitted my resume, I had a well-written cover letter. I showed my experience and my passion for the office with everything I've done through there. The hiring process was with two people, Kevin and the outgoing clerk. From there, the rest of the selectmen came in and had their meeting. So it was not just one person picking, it definitely was a process that I went through. And then I too did the same research of, if Kevin's gone, how does that play over? So I looked at some other towns, I actually got to go and talk to a bunch of clerks, and just for instance, because it's close, Sterling, she is appointed, and, if she's got job security, because job security, of course, is very important as these roles, and being non-political is also just as important. So I agree with you, Matt, on the non-political side of this. You really can't hold a political view when you're sitting in either seat. But like over in Sterling, you have to have all three selectmen it's got to be a unanimous vote to remove the clerk and replace her. It's not a one person, one opinion thing. It's definitely a group that takes care of that. So as an appointed clerk currently, that is the process that I went through, and I also am experienced in, I just got done facilitating a $500,000 grant, so grants are, something that I'm interested in, and, the whole process of what you need to do and how you, and my grant was on customer service, and I was teaching employers how to hire good employees and maintain that in their companies, and the big thing there was the hiring process, and I'm highly educated and trained in the hiring process and job applications and how to properly do that. And what I actually saw through Kevin was exactly what we aimed to do when we were facilitating that grant. So I have to say that was a really, really well process.
Excellent. Thank you. Where are we now?
Let's keep working, really happy to have a town
Man.
I see it on here,
Is it very good?
dash.
Oh, wow.
Oh, must be manager, manager.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, they just forgot the end.
Sean?
I got some participation for you on.
I'm sorry?
I got citizen participation for you on.
Yes, we're still open to that.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes. We're ready for Sean? I don't know.
My comment is, I've been going to several of these meetings and we've been going over what the selectmen are asking. I haven't heard much from the board. I'd like to start hearing more from you as to what changes you want. You've all should read the charter and found things in there to discuss. I haven't heard much on that, I think. And then my other question is, when Kevin was talking about the town, at the beginning of the charter is defined, at the beginning, usually that's like when the first whole paragraph's what the town is. I don't have my charter with me to double check. What's it say it is?
All the inhabitants dwelling within the territorial limits of the town of Plainfield as heretofore constituted shall continue to be a body politic and corporate under the name of the town of Plainfield, hereinafter called the town.
So would that include the school board? Town?
Nope. Take a look at the second paragraph, go down a little further, and you can see that it says, nothing herein shall be construed in effect of the right of the town to collect assessment, charge, debt, lien. Do you do that? Yes.
So does that answer the question you have about what the town is? Does that make-
Not really, because it interchanges back and forth throughout the entire charter.
Okay. That was my only question, because a lot of times things like that are defined at the beginning. It allows us to review the whole charter.
And Sean's point, his original one. If you have any questions, Sean, about my recommendations I circulated, I'm happy to answer them. But I think I probably done most of the talking on submitted ideas. So I will yield my vote.
Most of those meetings, I've been only hearing primarily what the selectmen have entered in ideas and rehashes of it, rewrites the same things.
And actually, I'm sitting here because I want to work with the town and I want to know what the town needs to work with.
Correct. But you're also, you have things too, so there might be things in that you don't like in the charter that are things that he missed. I'd like to start hearing some of that too.
Well, my things were the two questions that didn't pass. I still wanted those to go through with the appropriations. And the other one was the town clerk and the town tax collector. That one too, I was anxious to see something done about, because of what happened before with different offer being made to an elected town clerk. So those were things that I brought
So there's two people.
along too. I was in agreement
There's two
with that.
people on the whole board that said they had
Oh,
things.
No, I'll be glad to tell you my thing.
I'd love to hear them.
Oh, good. I was the chairman of the very first Charter Revision Commission in 1980. Okay? And when they asked me to do it again, at my age, my kids laughed. But I said, no, I will do it. Because I believe in the, we've lived here since 1980, 64, my husband and I've taught in this town since 1959. And I cannot believe how wonderful some of the changes in this town are. They were I don't think there's another place I would want to live at. The only problem I have is we don't have enough grocery stores. But otherwise, this is a wonderful place to bring up kids. It's a wonderful place to teach. You know, I can go anywhere and I can find people that I taught that'll come up and they'll say, do you remember me? And you don't remember them, but you feel it.
I'm not questioning your intent, I'd like to hear some of your ideas as the charter, what justice we made from the charter in your opinion.
All right, some of the elected, like the town clerk, I do not believe that should be elected. That should be appointed. I mean, all the training you've got to go through for something like that, the town clerk and the town tax collector, I mean, come on, you know. Just because somebody's running doesn't mean that they've got the aptitude to do it. You know, and there are a few things that I've read that I'd like to change. I'm going to bring it up. Not change, modify a little bit. You know, but my feeling is I don't believe that charter is as bad as what some people say. I think that they did a good job. That's my feeling. From an old lady.
I'm not going to defend myself as being here.
No. Hey,
I'm not questioning that at all. I'm just saying I'd like to hear some more from what you guys are seeing. Besides, like I said, we've been discussing one particular list of which we find out here. I'd like to hear some more of the ideas. I mean, you must have some. There must be things in there that you don't like.
But the other thing, Sean, is I don't know if you were at the last meeting, but we actually did, a lot of us were very vocal as far as did we agree or did we not agree with some of the things on that list. And so we just kind of took stance on, do we support it? We went back and forth. And I don't know if you were there.
I was there for that one, but you were still talking about the same list.
Yeah.
You must have developed your own lists. No?
No, necessarily. I mean, yeah, I'm here to see what the town needs and what they need to work with. That's why I'm here. I don't know why you're like this. I'm not here to run the town and tell them what's wrong with this charter.
Well, I think the most important thing about any charter change is if it's going to help. That's the only motivation I have. If it's going to help run the town smoothly.
But I also believe that I'd like to see more people here and expressing their point of view as you did. I mean, this is exactly what we're here for, to see what people in this town want.
My comment was not meant to insult anybody.
Oh, not as
I would like to hear some more opinions of other lists, that's all.
Well, we have.
Your teachers don't have a test.
There's a lot to cover here, and then if we start adding more, I don't know. We've got a schedule, we've got to meet by.
I understand, but there might be something that you guys start discussing. You might say this is more important than what we're already discussing.
I see these top 4 as priorities. I'd be happy if those 4 were on the ballot and nothing else. 4 or 5.
Well,
That is a good
I'll
point,
disagree
though,
with you there.
No, but that is a good point, though, too, is that, we've talked about how many potentially could end up on the ballot.
Right.
It's also what's to say that do we have to necessarily load up the ballot?
Right,
Because
right.
We may agree as a commission that maybe there's only a top 4 or top 5 that we actually go over.
All right.
We have to figure it out.
Because people will just glaze over.
Right.
Yes.
The more you have,
We've
right.
seen
The
that.
longer the list is, I feel, the more likely they're just not going to want to take the time.
Well, let's reflect the question back onto you. It is public input. What would you like to see?
I have no opinion on that right now. I was just looking, you guys have been studying this charter, not me, as much as you have. So I was just curious as to what, he's got a list, or there's a list she's already started generating, but you guys might have, you're looking at this book weekly or, hopefully a little more often than that. There must be things in there that you don't particularly care for. I wanted to hear those ideas too, because you might start discussing this part of it, and then the rest of the board gets on, and again, agrees with you, and maybe that becomes more important than one of the other things that you've already discussed. So you have to decide at the end which few things can actually make it onto the ballot. You might have something that's more important that everybody's just kind of like missed over. That's what I was curious, if anybody else has developed a list.
Or we may be in agreement from the list that has been getting reviewed and kind of chopped up. We may be in agreement. Again, it's still to be determined as far as what we want to send forward, but maybe we do want to just focus on the bullet points that we have been discussing.
Just trying to get, if you have ideas about trying to get these across to the public.
Yeah.
I said, I joke, I said maybe we could do some skids or something. But
Maybe
we have to
add in the term on fire for the next one, like 4 weeks before election.
Okay.
I know it probably costs a lot of money.
I think when
We
we
gotta
get
get, we
towards
gotta
the
get.
final public hearings, maybe we'll just make sure that those ads are in there.
that would be interesting. See, I had questions in
Yeah,
Maybe
I've
we
seen
can-
other towns
they would
do
have
it.
a chance to
That
ask
money,
about it.
yes,
The
I
money
can
one
understand
is
that.
something
Yeah.
that they-
Right.
There was one idea on the list I had submitted before that we haven't spoken to, but I'm sure everybody has an opinion on it. And it was changing 6-year terms to 4-year terms.
Yeah, I have, I didn't know. I don't, I do. I'm on the zoning board and I've been on it for 3 years and I'm just beginning to learn what I'm doing. So if I had a 4-year term, and then I'd have to run again. It costs money to run again, so no, that's fine. 6 years.
We have an election every 2 years. I think it fits in
4.
without a change
I
in
know,
cost.
But it's a lot, yeah.
yeah, but I still have to run, I still have to go out, I still have to put in money.
Your cost.
It's expensive, yeah, for me also. And I have, like I said, I've been on it for 3 years, well, I filled out 2, finished 2 on someone else's, and then I've got the 6 that I'm working on now. And I am learning every single day. It's not something you can just sit down and I was on the Board of Education, and I know, you can't just sit down and know what's going on. You can't. And you can't read a book and it's going to tell you what's going on. You have the situations that come up and you work with them, you go to your books, you go to your statutes, and you look at them and you know. So that's why I didn't know.
No, I agree with you.
I have a comment on that. I agree with Rosalind on that as well, and the appointed, it does take time to learn the position or to learn what the Board of Commission is. And in the charter, what I fall under is very wordy, and my terms were actually, and I have to go to the Board of Selectmen to ask them to change that because the charter is very hard to read. I know we've got the attorney involved, and we do have the clarity on it, but because the charter was not so clear, my terms, I was only put in for 2 years, where I'm supposed to be for the remainder of the term. Kevin, do you remember what that is? 4.2?
It also says order to the next.
That's if, so there's where the confusion comes in.
3 options.
So if you look at it, there's 3 options. The selectmen chose the first option, but that doesn't even give me enough time to, the state only offers the classes twice a year, the spring and the fall. So I got 1 class in already, and so I fell in the fall really late, but I got in there. I'm gonna take my spring class next week. There's not even enough time to get into these classes that the state offers before I have to go up and run for election. So if this seat does not become appointed, that I think should be made a little clear, although after the attorney explained it, it is very clear, but now I'm sitting in a seat with the wrong terms recorded. That now has to be fixed and justified because of interpretation and how people interpret it. It was Louisa Tracus, the prior clerk. She showed me how it was worded and how my terms were recorded incorrectly, according to the charter. I read the charter like Barbie did, the last clerk. So it just, everybody had a different interpretation, and Sean, just like you said, there was 3 options, and until the attorney really broke it down for us, then it was clear, but it's not clearly written.
What is the legal interpretation of it?
44C, anybody interested? 44C. Any vacancy in the elective office except the first selectman for whatever cause arising shall be filled by the Board of Selectmen for the unexpired portion of the term, or until the next town special, or regular election, whichever is sooner. Interpretation by the attorney was the first one. We did.
That was what they chose to do sooner, was appoint versus going to the next election. But
You can appoint until the next election, correct? And then it goes to election.
that's where the confusion sets in. But no, it's for the remainder of the term is what it says. It clearly states you shall be appointed for the remainder of the term. Or,
So we've been going along for all the years.
yeah, that was an option. It's very confusing, you know, the charter, I mean, if the commission wants to clarify or clear up something, that's definitely a confusing piece right there, because I'm in the thick of it.
Well, she would
Man, where was that?
the next election.
Anytime. It's section C, second one down. We're talking about vacancies.
Yep.
So Louisa, depending on what clerk you're talking, Louisa is the one who brought it to my attention. So I'm not sure, if, I don't think this happens too often, where you have a vacancy in an elected seat. In this town. Oh, on boards, commissions. And that might be a different section in the charter, I'm not sure.
Well, getting back to 4 years, 6 years, I think Roz is right. There is a learning curve, and Diane too, and put all that effort out, and then you have to run again.
Matt, what is your reason for that? What is your reason?
A 6-year term is a pretty lengthy endeavor for someone who's getting into politics. Most of our, I mean, the only other 6-year terms I can think of offhand are U.S. senators. So when you're looking at the town level, I mean, our own first selectman, who I would argue, or the position of first selectman, which probably has a much steeper learning curve than Board of Ed, Board of Finance, and that has a 2-year term. And I think part of the logic in that being a shorter term is because it is a very important position and you have the opportunity to replace or renew with that form of frequency. I think 4 years is a, you know, not too long, not too short term length. In this case, against the context of a 6-year term, I mean, it's most of these boards, if not nearly all of them, are a volunteer basis. So if it comes at a personal cost to it, that's your own calculation that it is worth it, because that's the price of your time and your volunteerism at that point. And I think when you are looking at a 6-year commitment versus a 4-year commitment, you're widening the pool of people who are going to take that as a serious thing that they might decide to try.
I don't know, I've been in town a long time, and when people get to the point where this is it, it's enough, they just resign.
Well, that's why they made revisions.
Right,
Charter.
yeah, but I would disagree that should just be thrown out there as just a simple thing. Like, well, if you don't like it or you don't want to stay in there, just resign. I disagree that that's not something that
I
should be
didn't
viewed
throw
like.
it out like that.
No, but that's how I've heard it from many other people too. Though, is that if you're elected in your position, you don't like it, just resign. It's like, as I dealt with as chair of the Board of Finance, I went through several resignations of elected officials on that, and it is a process that if we cannot do it as a board within 30 days, it then has to go to the Board of Selectmen, which we never wanted to see it get to that point, but just even within a 30-day time period, trying to scramble and find a replacement, it's tough, especially in today's current day and age with volunteers. I'm also thinking about, well, who are the type of volunteers that I want to try to convince to get on the Board of Finance? It's like, I also want to be looking at people who are maybe Matt's age or younger. That would be the future of this town. You know, I look at those as possible. And I do know that I've pooled some people who are in their, let's say, 21 to 31 range, and I have asked them, like, have you ever considered running for office? And they're like, well, what does it pay? Like, not much. It doesn't pay much. It's volunteer. But then one of their next questions after, okay, so it's volunteer, how long of a commitment is it? I was like, well, it depends what do you want to do? You want to go for Board of Ed or Board of Finance? You know, this is planning and zoning. And when I tell them, well, some of these spots are 6 years, you know, they look at me, 6 years? I'm like, I mean, I have no idea where my life is going to be in 6 years. You know, they don't work here in this town. You know, they're not necessarily raising a family, but they do care about their town just as much as somebody who's been a lifetime resident in this town. And maybe they do want to serve their community and run for an office. But I take into account, you know, their feedback on a 6-year commitment. To me, that's very valuable too. Just like, you know, Raza said, what, you know, what her thoughts are, you know, why it should stay the way it is. So I certainly like to weigh in on both ends of it, and I do agree with, you know, some of the things that matter.
Again, this one thought came to me too, though. The public, if you're going to put this as a question on the ballot, I don't know if the general public is going to understand that.
Changing all 6-year terms to 4-year terms.
I don't know what they're going to think or how that's going to.
Yeah.
I personally would have thought that's fairly, I thought that would have been one of the more straightforward questions
but then again, you know, are they gonna understand the financial thresholds that we're talking about now? You know, we seem to have a grasp on it, we seem to, but we put it on the ballot again? Does the general public can understand those?
Oh,
I don't know.
Kevin?
If it's possible, Matt, do you have any data behind that? And if so, do you need help getting that data?
Data on what specifically?
Okay, so you're saying that 6 is long-term, and how many people drop off before those 6 years? That might be helpful, because you understand, when we were on the Board of Education, it was just a scramble all the time. No one wanted to stay for the 6-year period.
I see.
That learning curve was basically, first year, you're super quiet, you don't say a lot.
Yeah.
Second, you're starting to say a few things. Third year, you're really involved, and you're starting to get going. So yeah, those are the years that you watch people as they mature through the process. Hopefully, they'll stay.
These seats is anybody entitled to. You know, it's an elected position, so if you're doing a great job over 4 years and people want you still in there, they will do that. If you're doing a terrible job and they decide you're out, you're out. And then the sunk cost is only 4 years of that rather than 6 if you're motivated still to stay the whole term.
That's in a perfect world.
I'm sorry.
That's in a perfect world.
So,
I gotta get out of that one.
Don't worry about it.
yeah, okay.
Think about it this way though, Matt. If you're doing a 4-year term, every 2 years you turn over half the board. You're losing a lot of experience.
Only if they lose an election.
Correct. But you still stand a chance of happening this year. Now, with 6-year terms, every 2 years you're changing a third of the board, a third of the board, a third of the board. You still have 2/3 with experience.
Did the Board of Ed just in a special election elect someone who was an assistant superintendent? That's their first time on a board to my knowledge.
So they happen to find somebody who was assistant superintendent.
Yeah.
If they elected me, what experience I
Again, my point being, we don't know with certainty whether someone's going to be coming in cold turkey without any prior knowledge or whether they actually have a wealth of knowledge.
Well, you have to assume they're not going to have, you have to assume they don't have knowledge.
Seems like it might be a flip of a coin to me. But
That's part of the election.
It was just another thought to think about that. I appreciate it.
Well,
Another point that I've heard is that some people don't want to necessarily be stuck with somebody for 6 years, even though they may not be, for example, we're not stuck with necessarily the same first selectman or board of selectmen. We have 2 years, you know, before we can decide if we want to keep them or not. But the others, I mean, once they get elected in, you know, unless they resign, we do have them. And it is possible that somebody could do a bad job. Actually, look at Killingly, you know, as an example. There's people in Killingly who have issues with some of their elected officials in their Board of Ed. But just as an example, you know, people would like to know, okay, so how long before we can try to vote this person out because I really don't like the job that they're doing, whether it's on planning and zoning, Board of Finance, Board of Education. It's like, well, they're there, again, unless they resign, they're there for 6 years. So, you know, some people would like the ability to get rid of them at an earlier point. And I've also heard some people say that the whole idea of career politicians, now granted, you got to understand, they think that some of us get paid, you know, on the town level, you know, and think that we're all politicians, which we're not, you know, getting rich off this. But still, they throw it all in the same basket because, again, I try to educate a lot of people as far as what is national government, what is state government, what is town government. What they find out quickly is that those of us as the town government, we're not politicians who are trying to make a career out of this. We're trying to do better for the town. But again, you've got to look at things from a different perspective, not just your own, but the public, who at the end of the day is going to make the decisions, you know, for the town. We got to consider, you know, what their input is, you know, and their view on things. And it's not all going to be the same as us.
It's not a perfect world.
Well, I do actually have accurate numbers on that. State and local government, average of 1.3% a month quit and resign. So doing that math, you're between 15 and 20%. And that's Bureau of Labor Statistics 2021. And it's currently at 1.2%. Last year was 1.2, the year before 1.0. So on average, I'd say a fifth, a good solid fifth, 20%.
It's not bad.
Yeah, they go in, they go out.
They found out it's not a glamour job. Yeah.
Is that for 6-year positions?
It doesn't get into the details, but then again, I'm running on my phone. So it's the best numbers I got.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I don't want to continue too much now. I think, because I never did close public participation. I kept it open as an open forum, so.
Keep it open. Keep it open.
I think we have enough we can still look at, and
Can I say
we have
one?
another meeting coming up in 2 weeks on a Tuesday. Yes.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, one more
I
thing.
just wanted to address this for Sean. The Board of Selectmen have to deal with the charter all the time in doing things. And in the charter, section 11-7 is the review and amendment of the charter. It says the Board of Selectmen shall review the several provisions of this charter from time to time as it deems such review to be in the best interest of the town. But then it sends it off, the Board of Selectmen shall appoint a charter revision commission to act on these revisions and do exactly what they're doing. The Board of Selectmen isn't going to make the decisions as to how to do this. They're not going to tell them, oh, you need to have 6-year terms made into 4-year terms. It's up to the commission to come up with all that. But the Board of Selectmen does review the charter and bring those revisions to them.
So the way you're interpreting it is the only person, the Board of Selectmen, are the only ones that turn in information to be changed on the charter?
No, I'm just saying this is why the Board of Selectmen is bringing, because this is their job to do that. Yeah.
Every day, I understand that.
Yeah, okay.
My point was, is you have this whole board that have read the charter, they might have found things that were a little bit different, but it seems like you spend a lot of time on this one group of things, that's all. Everybody else questions.
It's the charter,
Yeah,
it's part of the charter.
We're pinpointing.
Yeah, it's a part of it.
So anyway, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
Second. Okay. All in favor? Opposed?
Are you opposed, Trent? No, I can stay here for the next 3-4 hours.